On the morning of October 19th, 2023, a group of around 10 people from a yoga retreat set out on kayaks across Lake Atitlan in Guatemala. Before heading out onto the water, someone filmed the group. In the footage, 29-year-old Nancy can be seen waving at the camera as she paddles away from shore, smiling and enjoying herself. That was the last time anyone captured her alive. Nancy was a behavioral interventionist aide from Monterey Park, California, who worked with special needs children at an elementary school. She had been to this exact retreat the year before and loved it so much she came back. She arrived in Guatemala on October 14th, put her phone on airplane mode to fully disconnect, and by all accounts was exactly where she wanted to be. 5 days into the retreat, the group went kayaking. According to Lee and Elaine Beal, who owned the local kayak company that rented them the equipment, 8 of the 10 returned to shore without incident. In the distance, roughly 100 yards out, 2 single kayaks were still on the water, Nancy's and another woman's, a California public defender named Christina Blazek. The Beals watched the 2 paddle further out until they lost sight of them entirely. Eventually, a distress signal was called in. When Blazek returned to shore, she was visibly distressed. However, what struck the Beals was that nobody from the group said a word to them. Not about what had happened, not about Nancy, nothing. The group, in the Beals' own description, immediately clamped up. They also left without paying for the kayaks. And when the Beals called the hotel the following morning to follow up, they were told the entire group had already checked out. Every single member of the retreat had left Guatemala within 8 to 12 hours of Nancy going missing. Blazek's version of events came through her attorney weeks later. According to him, she and Nancy had happened upon each other on the lake. They chatted, and at some point, Nancy said she wanted to go for a swim. Blazek warned her not to. The water was rough and the current was strong. Nancy jumped in anyway, pushing her kayak away in the process. Blazek tried to retrieve it, balancing between both kayaks but lost it again. When she turned back around, Nancy was gone. That account raised more questions for Nancy's family than it answered. They tried contacting Blazek directly, first through the yoga instructor, then by email on October 25th and again on October 31st. No response. When the family's Guatemalan attorney obtained a copy of the police case file, Blazek's statement wasn't in it. A Guatemalan prosecutor later sent a formal request to the U.S. Embassy asking for international assistance to obtain witness statements. Early in 2024, Nancy's family made a further allegation that a bribe had been paid to ensure Blazek's statement was omitted from police records and that she was not detained in Guatemala. Blazek's attorney denied this entirely. The family launched a private search almost immediately. They hired a helicopter search company, deployed drones, and underwater sonar equipment. The search coordinator working with the family stated publicly that if Blazek had simply helped narrow down where on the lake Nancy had gone into the water, they could have reduced the search from an enormous volcanic lake to an area the size of an Olympic swimming pool. Without that information, they were searching blind. The Guatemalan Navy halted their own official search after just 72 hours. Nancy's body has never been found. The case ignited a furious response online. On TikTok alone, the hashtag for her name accumulated 36 million views, with creators posting every update. When Blazek was publicly named in a news release by the family's search team, the online attention shifted to her directly. Hundreds of calls flooded her personal phone. One message threatened to come for her if she didn't start talking. Death threats arrived from multiple countries. Nikki, Nancy's sister, and the family's primary spokesperson said she felt genuinely awful when she heard about the threats, that it was the last thing she wanted. But she also maintained that public pressure was the only tool they had left. As of the latest information, Nancy remains officially missing. The Guatemalan authorities still classify her death as an accidental drowning. Her family does not accept that. On the night of September 12, 2014, 18-year-old Hannah Graham went out with friends in downtown Charlottesville, Virginia. She was a sophomore at the University of Virginia, a straight-A student and a softball player. The evening started at a party at an apartment building on 14th Street. Surveillance cameras inside captured her walking down the hallway at around 9:30 that night, looking completely normal. She left the party just after midnight. She left alone, and after that, 5 different cameras documented the last hour of her life. At 12:46 in the morning, footage from outside a pub on Grady Avenue showed Hannah visibly stumbling and clearly disoriented. She was having a conversation with a man. 14 minutes later, a camera at a Shell gas station caught her running across railroad tracks, alone, away from the direction of her apartment. 6 minutes after that, she appeared again outside a pizza place on East Main Street. A man in the footage looked over his shoulder, stepped into a doorway, and then began walking behind her as she passed. He later spoke to police and said he had been concerned about her and was trying to make sure she was safe. He wasn't the threat. The threat was already there. At some point after 1 in the morning, Hannah and a man with long dreadlocks entered a bar called Tempo Restaurant together. They stayed for about 15 minutes and left together. Enhanced footage from the downtown mall showed the two of them walking side by side, his arm around her waist. A witness who saw them described Hannah as appearing drunk. Another witness later told police they saw her near a burnt orange Chrysler Sebring and heard her say, "I'm not getting in that car with you." At 1:20 in the morning, she texted a friend saying she was lost and trying to get to another party. The messages were misspelled, barely coherent. That was the last anyone heard from her. However, the most chilling footage from that night wasn't the bar or the gas station. It was what the downtown mall cameras had captured earlier, before any of that. They showed Hannah walking east as the man with the dreadlocks walked the opposite direction. He stopped when she passed and waited, then he turned around, crossed the mall, and began following her, blending into a small group of people to stay close without being seen. Investigators would later describe it plainly as stalking behavior. His name was Jesse Matthew. He was 32 years old, a nursing assistant at the UVA hospital, and a part-time volunteer football coach. He had no adult criminal record. What investigators discovered as they dug deeper was that he had been accused of assaulting at 2 different universities years earlier, Liberty University in 2003 and Christopher Newport University shortly after, and had left both schools immediately following each allegation without any criminal case being brought. Neither incident had come up in any public record until now. Charlottesville police identified Matthew as a person of interest on September 19th, a week after Hannah disappeared. They searched his car and apartment. On September 20th, they named him publicly and asked him to come in for questioning. He showed up the following day to ask for a lawyer, then he left. By the time a warrant was issued for his arrest, he was already gone. Driving to Texas in his sister's car, he ended up on a beach in Galveston County. 4 days after the warrant was issued, a woman on the beach recognized him from news coverage and called police. The search for Hannah had drawn nearly 4,000 tips and covered 700 square miles. On October 18th, 5 weeks after she disappeared, searchers found human remains on an abandoned farm off Old Lynchburg Road, about 8 miles from where she was last seen. The medical examiner determined she had died from homicidal violence. Her parents visited the site after the discovery. Chief Longo, who had become the public face of the investigation from the start, addressed the press with visible emotion. What nobody knew yet was that this wasn't the first time Jesse Matthew had done this. In September 2009, a 20-year-old Virginia Tech student named Morgan Harrington disappeared after a concert in Charlottesville. Her remains were found on a farm in the same county in January 2010, less than 5 miles from where Hannah would later be found. The case had gone cold. Days after Matthew's arrest in 2014, investigators announced that forensic evidence from Morgan's case matched evidence taken from Matthew. He later pleaded guilty to her murder alongside Hannah's and was sentenced to multiple life terms without parole. On the evening of June 2, 2007, 18-year-old Kelsey Smith left her house in Overland Park, Kansas, to buy an anniversary gift for her boyfriend. She had just graduated high school 9 days earlier. She told her father she'd be back soon. Target's surveillance system captured her entire visit. She walked in, browsed the aisles, called her mother to ask where she could find gift boxes, and headed back to her car. Nothing about any of it looked unusual. However, when investigators went back through that footage frame by frame, they found something that changed the entire direction of the case. 30 seconds after Kelsey walked into the store, a man in a white shirt followed her in, and for however long she was inside, he was in nearly every aisle she visited. When Kelsey went to the checkout, he left the store before she did, and when the parking lot camera slowed down enough to make out the movement near her car, it showed him running toward her. Kelsey's car left the Target lot at 7:07 that evening. She wasn't driving it. Her family grew concerned when she didn't come home and her phone went straight to voicemail. Her boyfriend John showed up at her house for their date and hadn't heard from her either. They started searching. Eventually they found her car sitting in the Macy's parking lot across from the mall, unlocked, her purse still inside, and the gift she'd bought still on the seat. Her keys and her phone were gone. Macy's had a camera on the lot. At 9:17 p.m., it captured Kelsey's car pulling in. A figure in a white shirt got out of the driver's side and ran. That white shirt was the only real lead investigators had. They released the clearest image they could pull from the target footage and set up a tip line. More than 500 calls came in, and most went nowhere. Then a woman called and said she recognized him. She had seen his face and his truck on the news and knew exactly who he was. He was her neighbor. Officers went to the home of 26-year-old Edwin Hall that same night. He was in the middle of packing for what he described as a family vacation. When shown the footage, he didn't deny being there. He admitted to being at Target that evening, but insisted he had nothing to do with Kelsey. However, when investigators had gone through her car earlier, they had lifted a single unidentified fingerprint from the seatbelt latch. It hadn't matched anyone in the system at the time. With Hall now in custody, they ran his prints. It was a perfect match. 4 days after Kelsey disappeared, searchers following a cell phone signal found her in a wooded area near Longview Lake in Missouri, about 20 miles from the target. She had been strangled with her own belt. Her clothes were found nearby, stained with bleach. Hall later admitted he had spotted Kelsey pulling into the Target lot and followed her inside specifically to confirm she was alone. When he saw she was, he went back to his truck, retrieved his firearm, and waited. He said he targeted her because he thought she looked young and had nice legs. He had no prior connection to her whatsoever. He pleaded guilty to all charges in July 2008 to avoid the death penalty and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. In court, he said, "I can't find the right words to say today. I am so sorry for what I have done. That's it. That's all I can say." The case had already become a national story long before Hall ever stood in that courtroom. When the surveillance image was first released, it spread fast, featured on America's Most Wanted, and shared widely enough that it generated over 500 tips within days. The community response in Overland Park was enormous. Hundreds of volunteers joined the search in the days Kelsey was missing, and when her father Greg addressed them before a memorial service, he thanked every one of them personally. On the morning of May 11, 2011, James Pitson dropped his 6-year-old son Timothy off at kindergarten in Aurora, Illinois, just like any other Wednesday. He had no reason to think anything was wrong. He drove away, went about his day, and came back later to pick him up. Timothy was already gone. His mother Amy had shown up at the school between 8:10 and 8:15 that morning, told staff there was a family emergency, signed him out, and left. There was no emergency. She had simply taken him. What followed over the next 3 days looked on the surface like a mother and son having a spontaneous adventure. Surveillance footage from a resort in Gurnee, Illinois, shows Timothy walking through the lobby holding his mother's hand, looking happy, completely unaware of what was happening. The following day, they drove to a water park resort in Wisconsin Dells. On the morning of May 13th, cameras at the checkout desk captured what would become the last known footage of Timothy alive. A 6-year-old boy in line with his mother, fidgeting with a backpack the way any bored child would, waiting to leave. After they checked out, Amy made a series of phone calls to family members between noon and 1:30 in the afternoon. She told them she and Timothy were safe. During one of the calls, Timothy could be heard in the background telling a relative he was hungry. The calls were placed from an area near Sterling, Illinois, about 80 miles west of Aurora. After 1:30, Amy switched her phone off. It was never turned on again. That evening, surveillance cameras in the small town of Winnebago, Illinois picked her up alone. First at a Family Dollar, then at a grocery store nearby. Timothy was not with her in either clip. At 11:15 that night, she checked into a motel in Rockford by herself. The following afternoon, a housekeeper found her dead in the room. She had taken her own life. Next to her body was a note. In it, she apologized and wrote, "Tim is somewhere safe with people who love him and will care for him. You will never find him." Amy and James had been heading toward divorce, and what family members have said in the years since is that Amy was consumed by a fear that her history with mental illness would cost her custody of Timothy. Her sister Kara later said Amy had hidden just how bad things had gotten from most of the people around her, and that the prospect of losing her son was something she simply could not face. Investigators went through everything. Amy's SUV was found in the motel parking lot and taken back to Aurora. Inside the back seat was a significant amount of blood that matched Timothy, though a family member explained he had suffered a nosebleed in the car earlier that month. They analyzed dirt samples found in the vehicle, checked websites she had visited, pulled toll records, credit card receipts, and cell tower data. By a month into the investigation, police admitted they were no closer to finding him than they had been on day one. Searches of the Sterling area, where her last phone calls originated, turned up nothing. Tips came in steadily over the years. A boy spotted at a Denny's in North Aurora, another reported sighting in Massachusetts, and every single one fell apart on follow-up. Timothy's father, James, has never accepted that Amy harmed his son. He believes she handed him to someone she trusted, possibly someone connected to Iowa, a place the family had ties to, and that whoever took him may still have him today, either unaware of the full story or too afraid to come forward. On the 13th anniversary of the disappearance, James asked the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children to pass along a message. "Timothy, if you're out there, your dad loves you and he's looking for you." Timothy Pitson would be 20 years old now. He has never been found.